Welcome to the Scoop World Order. We have a very, very, very special guest today, along with NevadaBuck and Kevin Noon. Today we brought in our boy Ross Fulton, our X's and O genius, who looks a lot like Ryan Day's long lost brother. So Ross Day Fulton, good to have you, my man. I'm just going to start with you because everyone's dying to know what is going on with our defense. Can it get fixed? How can it get fixed? Or is this thing a lost cause?
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I don't know if looking like Ryan Day is so good after the Saturday performance, but the I mean, I
But
I think it can be improved.
we will point out that you live in California, so you're not going to be walking the streets and having eggs thrown at you like you would if you lived in
That's
Columbus
right.
right
I'm
now.
not.
So
I'm in no way responsible for what that defense put on the field on Saturday. The no,
exactly.
can it be fixed? I think it can be improved. There's a lot to fix though, from scheme to the execution. They obviously can't change what Day has insisted upon doing here from the get-go, which is this single high scheme that primarily plays cover one and cover three, but they can execute at least those coverages better. And there's like, I think, fairly simple things that they could clean up to do that.
I agree. Are there any instant things that you would change, like things that you see schematically as you watch the game where you're like, why are they doing that? And I've mentioned one thing over and over to you again about the zone and the red zone. Are there some things that you would tweak immediately to say, stop doing this, where they can run a simple crack motion and it takes two guys and then they run like a little short side run play and like the guard has nobody to block and there's nobody to block. I laugh at it. I mean, it just reminds me of Bama. It
Yeah.
reminds me of Shiano versus Maryland. And it's like, oh my God, like we have to get out of man coverage at some point. But are there any little tweaks that you see that you would say, do this now, and this would at least give our players a chance to make a play?
Yeah, I mean, those are good examples. And it does seem that this stuff keeps happening to Ohio State for some reason. But the easiest thing to me is get out of pre-rotating the safeties. If you want to play man, align and split safety so that the one can then come down at the snap depending on what the tight end does, because they just cannot defend split zone action. I mean, Oregon ran split zone and then they ran, they'd run like the little RPO off of it where the quarterback can pull it and then throw it to the tight end and the flat off of that. They started out by leaving the tight end uncovered. Then Eichenberg tried to get on his horse and follow that guy all the way across and left a gaping hole in the A gap for that 77-yard run. So if you put them in split safety, then, Don Brown calls it city. I mean, there's a bunch of calls for it. Basically, if they see split motion, the safety to the opposite where the tight end lined up and towards the split motion just comes down at the snap. Then you still at least have all gaps covered. The other thing they need to figure out is if they're going to play man, they need to be stop being so obsessed with matchups, because Oregon just kept aligning in trips to the field, or even worse, that like unbalanced quad alignment. And Ohio State puts all their DBs over to that side, and they just kept, as you were talking about with the crack blocks, they just kept being outnumbered to the boundary. So they need to, it doesn't have to be all the time. They need to have some sort of split safety coverage that they can check to, or even it doesn't even have to be split safeties, just even like three cloud. Anything that's just like beyond like your absolute basic day one install cover three.
Yeah, and you're right. They did go corners over a ton, and they were aligning. Now, people, you might have to explain a little bit what the 4x1 unbalance means. So when they align like that, they have receivers that are lined up and they're receivers in number, but they're not eligible to go out for a pass because they're covered up, quote unquote, by the outside receiver. Like when you line up, there's got to be 7 across the line, 1 on each side is on the ball. And then, that's why like you'll see guys shift and they'll point to the official to make sure that they're off or on. And like I was sitting in the stands, like in ADIC, I was on the 50, I had a great view of it, and I was like, they're unbalanced. I was like, why are we pressing him? He's not eligible. But in the heat of a game, if you don't have people upstairs communicating that to you, it's tough. Like that's something the Patriots did against the Ravens in the playoffs famously a few years ago, where they put Shane Vereen at an ineligible spot. But if you see Shane Vereen, who is the top pass catching guy they had out of the backfield, lined up in the slot, you're gonna walk someone's gonna cover Vereen in the heat of the moment. They're not gonna leave, a running back who gets 80 catches every year open. And Oregon was one that our guys kept pressing a guy that literally was not allowed to catch pass. So it was like, but explain Unbalanced just real quick, because we've seen it 2 straight weeks, different formations.
Yeah, and
Go
it's
ahead.
yeah, no, and that 4-by-0, what I set is becoming really popular. Ohio State used it on
Mhm.
that first Williams touchdown against Minnesota. So yeah, as
Yep.
you said, you basically have 4 wide receivers to one side, but the second usually you'll see like 2 guys up on the line of scrimmage and then a slot in the tight end. And that second guy on the line of scrimmage is, as you said, covered. So he cannot go downfield for a pass. Now, what offenses will do is at the snap, that guy will go backwards. So essentially, he can catch
Mhm.
a bubble screen. So you do have to,
Yeah.
you can't just like leave him totally uncovered. But
Yeah.
as you said, it was bizarre because they'd have the cover safety, Latham Ranson, usually like up in press, like in that guy's face, and
Yeah.
they would just be outnumbered into the opposite side. And so like, they kept running. Either they'd send the running back to the the 4 wide receiver side and run an RPO, run pass option, where the quarterback could either throw like sort of a slip screen to that running back or run inside, or then they ran those, runs back the opposite way away from it. And Ohio State just does not have the numbers because, at that point they've gone from like the goal of this defense is to have a +1 in the run game and have every gap accounted for. And that's why you play a single
Mhm.
high safety. But now they've pushed it to now they're actually outnumbered by being so stubborn and consistent in keeping that single high safety.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm gonna bring NevadaBuck in. Nevada, you're on here also. Chime in. What are your some thoughts that you have for Ross? I mean, obviously we all watch the game. We all have concerns. The whole world has concerns after we've been, basically out schemed by Minnesota and Oregon, to the point where, Oregon actually had the talent to beat us. Minnesota wasn't talented enough to beat us, but they executed. Um, Nevada, what questions do you have for Ross right now?
Well, I think the questions that I have for Ross are really, basic questions, and maybe you can dumb it down for some of the dumber viewers like myself that are out there. But it seems like that Ohio State doesn't disguise what they're doing well. And, as I've coached football myself, certainly not at this level, but at a much, much, much lower level. But one of the first things we teach is how to disguise our defense. And it doesn't seem like Ohio State does a particularly, good job of doing that. And why do you think that is? And what do you think it is that's inherent in this particular scheme, or the way that Combs is calling it, that causes them to be so predictable and easy to read for opposing offenses?
At some level, it's like what Ryan Day wants. I mean, they by definition are giving up any sort of disguise by pre-rotating the safeties. So you like as a quarterback, you already know you're getting a middle of the field covered. So when I say that, a coverage where you have a middle of the field safety. So that's either cover 1 or cover 3, and what guys are the 4 underneath and what are the 3 deep guys. And then, even when they do, the only time they they don't do that is when they are trying to disguise stuff. So, on Saturday, you'd see them sometimes getting split safeties pre-snap, and almost inevitably that was to hide either like a corner blitz or a cover safety blitz. So they would like frequently bring one of those guys from the boundary trying to get like an added number against the run game. And so like, then one of the safeties would rotate down so they'd still be single high. But the problem is like, and this gets to what's sort of even more frustrating is it's like even beyond the scheme issues, like the execution is so bad. Like those guys never got there. I don't know if it was like like how their depth, or they're like trying so hard to disguise it. But like, there was one play where Latham Ranson blitz, and he was so far away from getting to the quarterback by the time the ball was out, he basically like pulled up 5 yards short and just kind of sat there and watched the throw go. So, it's like it's I think it's particularly frustrating at some level because the whole point of being like this simple on defense, like, hey, we're going to play 2 coverages, is like we're going to be really good at the stuff we do because we have all this practice time, like Nick
Mhm.
Saban runs like 42 coverages. They're playing like man match, pattern matching, split safeties, everything imaginable. And it's like, well, we're only going to do two things, so we're going to be really good at them, and they're just not even really good at what they're trying to do.
Wow.
Like,
Wow. I mean,
I'm sorry, I just get so frustrated because like
no.
Kirk, like I see like a basic play action flood route over and over from Oregon, and like
Yeah.
Ohio State could never get the curl flat defender over to the curl flat zone. Like inevitably it'd be like the two guys, like the deep third guy and the curl flat guy, they'd run into each other, or the hook flat curl, or like, sorry, I should back up. Like, so again, like if you're playing cover three, which what they do, you're gonna have three deep defenders and four guys underneath. And so, a common route against that is basically a flood route where you're essentially sending three receivers to one side, like towards the sideline. So you essentially you get three wide receivers versus the two cover three defenders to that side, right? You see the deep third
Yeah.
guy and the curl flat. They didn't even have two defenders over there. They'd have one because the linebackers were just, or the bullet would just sort of sit there in mud and never get over to defend those routes cutting to the sideline.
Yeah, it was hard to watch. How many times have you rewatched the game since then? Because the one thing that's frustrating for me is like when I actually go to the game, I don't actually get to like see the game, if that makes sense. Like, I'm watching it in real time, but you know it is like when you can watch it on TV, you can rewind it, you can take notes, you can see the full picture. Like when you're sitting in the stands, like, you kind of see it, and then you can look at the Jumbotron and see it again, but it's not the same as when you're at home and you can really study it. How many times have you watched this game just to like be like, because there's sometimes I watch this stuff and I was like, am I crazy? Am I seeing things? I was like, how did we get ripped on this run? Because there's always there's always a reason for what happened. It's like, okay, they caught us in a blitz or whatever, or this guy's not good enough to make the play, or this guy's screwed up. Like, how many times have you watched this?
Yeah, so so I watched it live, obviously, and then like what I do is I'll rewatch, but that could involve me rewatching plays multiple times, and
yes, exactly.
I've ended up doing that a lot because like we're talking a lot about the pass defense, but like the run fits are awful, and so I'm trying to figure out like exactly what's going on there because and that's kind of actually causing a lot of problems. Which like at least last year they could defend the run. But like again on that split zone action, like the linebackers aren't properly accounting for it and like moving over a gap, and they have no true one technique nose guard. So like Oregon was just doubling. Like not to pick on Haskell Garrett, he's a very good three technique, but he's not a nose. And like he was just getting driven right into the Mike linebacker time and time again. He only made plays when they'd slant or stunt him from that spot because he's just not made to be at that position. So anyways, it's a long way of saying, technically twice, but lots of plays multiple times.
Yeah, I guess it's not like I could sit and watch it one time, but it could take 4 hours because you rewind, because you want to watch what every single guy does. Like on that 77-yard run, they had two guys in the C gap. And I was like, oh my God,
I know.
There's nobody home. There's nobody home in the A gap. And then, Bryson Shaw, who, I think he's very limited. The official, the umpire is standing right in the middle of the field and causes him to change his angle. So it almost like picks him a little bit. He has to like change his angle. And by the time, and he's not athletic enough to get around him anyways, but he didn't have a straight line to get to the A gap that was as big as, you could drive a bus through it. And he has to go around that official. And then right as he's going around that official, CJ, he's gone. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is awful. This is painful.
Yeah. And I've looked at that play so many times because for the life of me, still cannot tell you whether that was a scheme problem or just a screw up by somebody. So like, if you look right before the play, like all the linebackers are all patting their helmets, like they're checking to something. And then, so the tight end again, does that same split zone motion, basically at the snap, he goes across the formation.
Yeah.
Eichenberg flies after him, right? Which normally in their man coverage, the bullet is responsible for the tight end anyway. So I'm not sure why Eichenberg's doing that, but then it looks like the D line is slanting what ends up being away from the run play. And so the nose guard just gets crushed down, double teamed. And so if it either has to be the case that like Eichenberg messed up, but the linebackers then didn't account for the slant by coming back over the top. So to your point about having two guys in the C gap, like either Eichenberg was not supposed to chase that tight end, or if he was, like Hickman as the backside essentially linebacker had to like fly over the top to get to that front side A gap. It just seems like the front seven often does not seem on the same page between like what the defensive line techniques are and like how the linebackers are responding to it.
Yeah, and slanting, like when a line does a full slant and goes over basically one gap, they big stick down a gap. That's great in practicality, but if one guy gets stopped, then you have this canyon. And I mean, that was like something if we knew that they're bringing a guy from one edge and they're all slanting this way, if you stop one guy from getting to that far gap, then all of a sudden you have like a humongous hole. And like, we used to love it. Like if we could identify the blitz, we would run right into it. Get that crease, and you saw it. I mean, you saw that crease, and then you have Bryson Shaw, who's at center field, and he has to come down, and if he misses that play, it's 77 yards and gone, and he missed it. And it's not an easy play to make. And then when you have to run around the umpire who's just standing there like a potato, like I mean, like, oh my God. And then you see oh God. And you see the running backs like shot out of a cannon. You're just like, oh my God, this is so bad.
Yeah.
This is terrible.
I mean, I know, and I do have sympathy for like that guy who's asked to play this free safety center fielder position in this defense because they put so much on him. But like there was a play the next series where literally Proctor made essentially the tackle where Shaw missed it there, or it would have been another touchdown like that. And it's like, the difference at the time between it's a 15-yard gain still, but the difference between that and a 75-yard gain is enormous, obviously. So that gets to another problem they have going forward, which is Josh Proctor does not seem like he's going to be back anytime soon. And so they now, again, just like last year, have a gaping hole at free safety.
Who would you, if I said, okay, Ross Fulton, you're now the defensive coordinator of Ohio State, who are you putting at free safety? Because that you're right. That is an enormously difficult position to play in that defense. Because, if we keep getting creased, I mean, you're the only guy home. And if you miss it, it's gone. Who would you put there?
Yeah, and I'd be interested in Nevada's thoughts too, but I think I'd do one of two things. I'd either put Craig Young at the bullet and move Hickman to free safety, but what I would do then is, as I mentioned earlier, go to aligning at least in split safeties and then having the one come down at the snap, depending on what the offense does, since they're much more interchangeable. Or I think I'd move, if not that, Ransom to free safety and play Marcus Williamson, I guess, at cover safety, because you just at least need someone there who can get people on the ground.
Exactly. That's the thing. You need a guy that can get somebody down. Like, I mean, they don't have to be, some freight train hitter. They just got to get them on the ground, because if you miss it, man, it's like, it's curtains. Nevada, I'm going to bring you back in. What, since we just had our little dissertation, what second level questions do you have for Ross as we wax poetic about defensive schemes? Oh man, it's fun to watch.
Yeah, I'm not Nevada because his audio wasn't cooperating, so I'm jumping in here for a second. My question, I guess, is I'm looking at it from the other side of the ball right now. Did it and Kirk obviously played the position, and Ross, you're a student of the game. What was wrong with the run game where they just it didn't look like they were getting any push from the offensive line? Am I looking at it incorrectly, or I mean, what have you seen in your review of the game?
So I'll obviously, defer to Kirk as well. So I think there were occasionally times where I think it wasn't so much a push. I think there were times where the O-line did not properly ID the front Oregon was in, and they run kind of an odd front to like a 2-down front, jump around a little bit. And so like a guy didn't come up to the second level, but to me, overwhelmingly, the issue was that Ohio State was consistently getting outnumbered because Oregon was always bringing that overhang, especially on first and 10 off the edge. And like, if Stroud, they really didn't, Kirk and Nevada and I, we talked about this during the game, like, why isn't Stroud keeping? And like, upon review, they weren't really running tight zone read plays. It was more like mid zone. But to do that, then they got to combine it with the reliefs and the RPOs. And I know they threw them some, but like, they're just going to have to like pound and just keep throwing those to prevent teams from doing that. They did a little bit more in the second half because, I hate seeing the O-line blamed for something when there's not a guy that they're designated to block who's making tackles. That's on the scheme and the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, on the one big 4th and short where Sewell made the really good play, he was mugged up in the A gap, and that's Thayer's guy. And man, it is so hard for Thayer to get to that guy because he's mugged up, and Thayer's trying to get to him, and he just steps back and goes around the D tackle, and he's right in the hole. And like, that's if you draw that up like a true zone read, because they didn't, and you read the backside end, and then you have Nick Petit Frere go up for the overhang, then you got everybody accounted for. But the way we're doing it, since we don't read it just we're one guy short, and and they knew that because they know Stroud's not pulling it, and it makes it way harder in the running game.
Yeah, I think ideally on that play, you would hopefully get Whippler to come off, get Mumford to take the D tackle, and get Whippler to come off and pick up Soul. It's obviously easier said than done in the moment. I would think of all the play calls in that game. That's probably one Ryan Day would like back. I think that was pretty conservative. It was a long 4th and 2. It was pretty conservative and pretty predictable, frankly, from how they lined up.
Well, and the hardest part is they brought the safety down off the edge, so the guys did like a full gang where they all, it's a full zone to pick up the edge player, and so you got all these guys basically running flat, and you don't get a good productive double team where you can get that 1 yard easily, because everybody's basically turning sideways to get the guy off the edge, and the guys that are all slanting in. So it's what Urban, like I love Urban because he'd call that a loser play. Like before the ball's even snapped, we don't have enough guys to block them. And the blocks aren't going to be advantageous where we're going to be able to get a lot of push to get that 1 yard. So it's like, the answer is, it's ballsy, but you got to throw it. I mean, there were a lot of times I was looking at Chris Olave and there wasn't a safety anywhere near him. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I don't know if CJ can't check to that, but man, if I got Chris Olave one up against anybody in the country, I'm taking a shot because he's got to beat him. If there's no safety there, I'm like, oh my God, it's the whole field. That guy can't stay with Chris Olave in the whole field.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the oldest football adage that's wrong is like talking about balance. Like, if the defense is going to continually try to take away the run, like just throw it every down. Like those guys, they had no chance. And like, honestly, the most promising, I think, thing I saw about Stroud is that he was able to consistently complete those outs to Olave from the far hash mark. I mean, that's a hard throw. And defenses always give that to Ohio State because they're worried about the run. So in the getting beat deep, so they'll give you those soft corners. So like they're just going to have to keep throwing on people until teams back off because Oregon clearly their plan was to try to create negative plays in the run game and get Ohio State behind schedule.
Yeah, they wanted CJ to take those medium throws because they were not going to get beat over the top because they saw Minnesota. We ran like 20 plays against Minnesota and we had like 600 yards because every single throw that we made was 75 yards or whatever. So they're like, we're not going to give them that. And we're not going to let him run it all over us. So, he's got to make these intermediate throws. And he hit them. And, it's weird because, he threw for 475, but it was almost like when you have a fantasy football quarterback that is like losing by 40 in the first half. And then he throws for 350 because it's all like kind of like garbage time because they're giving him like these easy throws to hit because that's what they're giving him. So, I mean, that's, it was weird because, for anytime if a quarterback in Ohio State was throwing for 475, you're like, well, that would have been a hell of a game. But it felt like a quiet 475 because we took what they gave him, but we couldn't really do, in crunch time, we couldn't convert on 4th and short. We couldn't, get the deep strikes going, which is something that, that's kind of been like our calling card is that we can throw it over the top of people with Olave and Wilson because those guys are as good as it gets at getting the deep ball. But it's going to be real interesting to see where we go from here. What personnel wise, who do you think needs to play more on defense? Who do you think maybe we've seen too much of? Because that's the hard part is like, people are like, oh, well, that guy can't play anymore. He's terrible. And I'm like, well, if he's bad, you should see the guy behind him. Like, I mean, it's like these coaches, I mean, I know that coaches play favorites sometimes because they want guys that they can actually trust to do their job. But, if these guys are playing and they look terrible, like, it's not like there's some guy that's just sitting in the closet. They would pull him out and be like, oh, yeah, this guy's going to be Malik Hooker, So, I mean, who do you think we need to see more of? Who needs a little bit less time in the rotation? And how much should we cut down the rotation? Because the rotation is like, I've never seen anything like this. Like, I mean, when I played in 05, I looked out on the field. Now, granted, I had 2 first rounders and Schlegs, but I'd look out at defense and it was Bobby, AJ, Schlegs. Like, I mean, and I granted it's 2 first rounders. I get it. So I'm not trying to be slick because, I know when you have talented guys are going to play, but I've never seen us rotate this many guys. And it would drive, if I was a defensive player, it would drive me insane. Every single series, I didn't know if I was in or out.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, and I think that I've never seen anything like it with the linebackers. I mean, like the entire room plays like a handful of snaps a game. And I don't know how anyone gets in a rhythm. I mean, part of it, like Oregon was running the same things. Like we talk about the crack, but like
Yeah.
how do you adjust if you're on the sideline the first time, you're basically now just like seeing it for the first time again the second time they did it. Like the second time they did it, they had, Gaotti, who's a day off of eligibility, as essentially the forced corner dealing with that crack block. I mean, so some people are not being put in position to succeed, but like, so the first thing I would do is just figure out who your players are. I know there's injuries, and I frankly sometimes think they do a little bit of a disservice to the players when they don't say the guys are like nicked up, because then like they get blamed for stuff when it's just like, they can't fully run. But like, I mean, I think at this point we know what linebackers can at least like competent passably play, and like, Cody Simon and Mitchell, and need to be on the field. And then I think Pope, in nickel situations did a nice job, and I think that's a good package. And I mean, I think, and then as I said, they got to find somebody to play free safety or do something to minimize that guy's deep center field responsibilities. And again, I like what they've done by having the bullet, but then like you have to actually take advantage of it. Like putting Hickman in there to essentially just be a Sam linebacker doesn't really accomplish much. Like you need to use him, the versatility that gives you. But yeah, I mean, looking at like who played, I mean, they had like 26 guys on defense play compared to 15 on offense, which is ironic because they have all this depth at wide receiver, and they're not
Yeah.
pulling Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson off the field. So, I mean, I know
Yeah.
that, again, to your point, they don't have first rounders at linebacker right now, but like you got to at least let guys get in a rhythm, because like the more they see out there, the more comfortable they'll be adjusting. And if like you're only playing a handful of plays and you're sitting on the side, like I don't know how anyone can do that.
Yeah, and in reality, like if you're a coach and you're playing, a defense, like a coach might, if they run 70 plays, they probably call 20 different plays, and they flip the formation, there's times I'm sure they run the exact same play at different points of the game. So
Yeah.
if you're only playing like, okay, I get the first series and then the fourth series, like it's like everything's new to you. You get into no rhythm. It was like when I used to play offensive line, like, and we would play like Michigan State with D'Antonio. I knew exactly what he was going to do. So when I would see certain things, I would know exactly what was coming. And you only get that, and there'd always be new stuff. Like there's always new stuff when you're playing against a team, and they're always gonna have a couple of new blitzes or a new stunt or a new alignment thing they're gonna do against you specifically. And you got to be in the game to pick that up and see that and feel that. And it's like when you're doing this herky jerk rotation, like these linebackers can never get comfortable. And it's just, and mentally, I think it's hard to not know, am I in this series? Is Steel Chambers taking the series? Is Cody taking the series? Is, that's the
It's
hardest
like,
part for me, man.
yeah, and like they frankly just have guys that shouldn't be on the field right now. Like it was like a 4th and 2, and they've got like Eichenberg and Steel Chambers, and like Legend Cavazos is in a corner, and Sean. Like, what are they doing here? Like that's not a winning formula. Like I think those top corner. I think the one bright spot, frankly, for the defense is like Denzel Burke and Cam Brown.
Denzel
Like I
Burke,
thought the corners were going to be
yes. Yeah.
like a liability this year. But then like, they bring, I know again, Brown's banged up, but then like they bring in Cavazos, and like the drop off is just like vast. And, and I
Yeah.
just don't ever understand, like Ryan Watts played a bunch on week 1, and then he didn't play at all. And like Cavazos seemed behind him, but then now he's playing in that game. And so anyways, it's all just sort of maddening. I just think I'm sort of anti-rotation in general for the reasons you gave, unless it's like D tackle or you like absolutely have to do it. But like, just figure out who your best guys are and play them.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think Denzel Burke played the most snaps on defense. I think he played every snap. I mean, he was, that kid's a first rounder. I mean, as long as he's suffering injuries, he's in ink. If that kid keeps progressing the way he is, he's fantastic. But, for me, I just sit there and, when you have, I literally pulled up his pronunciation, Pali Aa Neo Teo Ote. Like when you have him in and it's these critical situations and he gets missed assignments twice. And I'm like, why is that kid in there? Like he found out at the walkthrough the day before the game that he was going to be eligible. And I'm like, and you have him in on 3rd and 9 from there. They're backed up on the 1-yard line. They're going to be punting out of the end zone. And he blows the coverage where he's man-to-man on the tight end. And they run that little motion. And, Cody Simon's trying to run with the running back. And he's, on the tight end, jamming him, and then all of a sudden he runs into Cody, and they both let the tight end go, and then they go after the flare and the quarterback, and then he just throws it over their head, and the tight end's open, and they convert on 39 from their own 1, and I'm like, oh my god, why is he in there? And I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And that play in some ways sort of epitomizes like the various levels of problems because like, first of all, again, it's 3rd and 9. Like, why are you in? Essentially, like they brought him in as the Sam linebacker. So then they have like both the Sam and the Bull in the game. Like, why are you in that package? It's 3rd and 9. Like, they're probably going to throw. And then like they bring in a bunch of new guys who haven't played until that series. And then they blow like basic coverage. Like, this is essentially just like, John Gruden likes to call it Spider 2, Y banana. It's like, that just sort of play action flood route. And it's like pretty basic. That's a really basic offensive coverage that you should have defended like 500 times in fall camp. So just basic execution problems as well.
Yeah. And, and again, like if you don't know any better, if you're not sure what you're doing, like he wasn't, the kid from SC, because he found out he was playing the night before. I mean, I would bet you a large sum of money he probably wasn't even on the travel roster until they might have taken someone off the travel roster to put him on after walkthrough, because they ruled him ineligible, so they're not going to travel him to the hotel, and then at walkthrough they say, oh, by the way, you're eligible now, so they probably kick someone off to practice the 70-man travel squad that stays at the hotel and put him on there. But I mean, he was on there for that. He was on there for the one crack replace play that they did on the closed end where the little, like, I mean, it's just it's stunning because it reminds me of Maryland, it reminds me of Alabama, where they do one crack motion and they don't replace, and then all of a sudden the corner goes in with the crack, and then the linebacker gets cracked, and the corner's too far in to make a play, and the guy just runs in the end zone, and you're just like, how is that? It's maddening.
Or like those Alabama on near the goal line last year when they do like the orbit motion, he'd come back and the poor corner would be like running essentially laps. It's like, if you want to play that much man coverage, like you have to be able to trade off receivers, or you can't do it. You're just going to look stupid against man coverage. So like, I understand the sort of overall day concept. I think is like, we're going to get great corners on the outside and we're going to like shut you down. But like, it's 2021. You're just going to you're going to look stupid in certain situations against motion if you can't like just do basic trade off of wide receivers.
Yeah. And like, that's why most teams run zone down there, because then it's easy. It's not, hey, we're going to motion here and he's going to get caught up in the muck of the of what I don't know. It's just it's hard to watch because I mean, clearly Joe Moorhead, who's I think really good at what he does, studied the Bama film, and he's like, well, if they don't change this, then this guy's going to be scot-free, just like Najee Harris was and Devontae Smith, and they do these simple motions in the goal line, and the corner is trying to do his responsibility, but that's one of those things where you got to put the players in a scheme where they can actually have a chance. It's like, it's not fair to the kids that they're trying to do it and they look terrible because schematically it's just it's very difficult to do. It's like when we would run the ball versus an overloaded box. Everyone says, oh, the offensive line sucks. So it's like, well, there's an extra guy in the box who's going to kill the running back. And we have a hat on we're blocking every guy we're supposed to, but there's an extra guy there and he's going to run right in and he's going to tackle the running back. It happens every time. It's stupid. So the answer to that is throw it. They can't do it all.
Yeah, I know. And it's disconcerting because you figured this would be stuff that they would work on during the off season. I mean, I wouldn't want to be, they got, I mean, Bama could have scored 100 against them in that game. And,
Easily.
I've mentioned on the board that like, I was pretty worried after that game where Ryan Day came out and made a comment like, oh, we were just so worried about stopping the run. Like, I would have tried to let Najee Harris run for 300 in that game. And like, it's better than getting RPO'd to death, just nonstop. And like, my fear was like, they just didn't take away the right lessons of what's the problem. And that seems to continue to be the case. But like, I do think on the bright side, like some of the stuff isn't like all that hard. Like, I'm sure they can trade off wide receivers in cover one. Like, I'm sure they can mix up coverages. Like, they had to at some point this offseason practice some sort of cover two or like some sort of basic split safety, even just 10% of the game, just to like, who cares when you call it? Just to like, you might get an interception because the quarterback will be so befuddled that you have a corner like sitting in the flat. He might just throw it right to him. Like, just mix things up just for mixing it up itself. It shouldn't be that difficult to make those kind of changes.
What what area from a performance standpoint, not schematically, but performance by players, what area defensively are you the most disappointed in? Because I'll go first just so you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Like, I can't believe how little pass rush we get. I really can't. Like, I mean, given having Jonathan Harris, or we have Harrison, not Jonathan, excuse me, Zach Harrison, who's a projected first round pick, runs a 10-5, or not 10-5, excuse me. He runs a 1.50 10-yard split, which is as fast as Tyreek Hill. We have Haskell, who's a returning All-American at 3 technique. We've got Jack Sawyer, we've got JTT, we've got Tyreek Smith, we've got Teron Vincent. Like, we've got none of these guys are young. I mean, other than obviously the freshmen, JT and Jack Sawyer. But are you surprised? Because I think that's the toughest part is people are like, oh well, if Jeff Hafley's there, it's like, well, Jeff Hafley would be getting destroyed too, because if you run man to man with no pass rush, I mean, that is you're wishing for a quick death. Because I mean, it's predicated on having Chase Young or ends that can get to the quarterback and disrupt him. Because man, it's ugly when you can't get home. And do you? I mean, I'm sure you agree, but like, I mean, go a little deeper than I did, and some of the issues there, because like there's times where it's like as much as we want to beat Kerry Combs to death, I'm like, guys, you got to go win. You got to go win your one-on-ones and go get to the quarterback, because when it's 3rd and 6, like they're throwing the ball, and you got to get home, or you got to at least affect him and get in his face and get him off his spot and get him out. You can't just stand there and throw it with no pressure and expect our guys to be able to cover that. But go ahead, I'll give you the mic.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's hard, right? Because there's a lot of times where like the opponent is getting the ball out quick out of his hands, but there are even times on Saturday where they weren't doing that, where they were trying to push the ball downfield, and they still weren't getting a pass rush. Now, it's pretty amazing to me that Oregon, I think, only had one pass of longer than 20 yards. I mean, they literally moved the ball in like 9-yard chunks at a time by just like RPOing them to death. But
Yeah.
again, this is where like, obviously, like I'm someone who like puts a lot of precedent in scheme. And so like the fact that they're not doing that, like you've got to be like a sim pressure, a zone blitz. I mean, Kerry Combs was in Tennessee. Don P's the defensive coordinator at the time. I mean, he's like renowned for all the simulated pressures he used, which is like to explain to people, it's like where you see like in a 3rd down in an NFL game, like a bunch of guys are sort of all standing up, mugging each offensive lineman, and then you're still only going to bring 4 and drop 7, but the offensive line doesn't know where they're coming from. Maybe you bring 3 to one side to try to overload the pass protection, and like you got to like put people in a position to succeed. Like if you don't have Chase Young, and like maybe they thought these guys were going to be, and maybe they'll learn now that that's not the case. But like, you gotta try something to try to just change up the looks. Use some zone blitzes. Again, it's sort of you can't just keep banging your head against the wall and expecting something different to suddenly happen.
Yeah, and for people that know, Dean Pease, a former head coach at Kent State, was defensive coordinator for Bill Belichick. And then when the Ravens were really good, he was the defensive coordinator there. Now the defensive coordinator for the Falcons. He was with Vrabel for a few years, retired, did the coaching retirement where they retire for like a month, and then they get a new DC job somewhere. Like Bruce Arians retired the 1 year, and he comes right back. But yeah, it's this, if guys can't just get home just one-on-one on effort, you got to do something to move them around, disguise them. Like I remember Chase Young, his last year, they played him at 3 techniques some in like it was like a bear look. I mean, they had a 0 nose. They put him in a 3 technique, and then they brought Baron Browning off one edge, and they brought another, rocket ship off the other edge. I don't know. It might have been Pete Warner or someone, but they had 2 guys that ran like 4.4s, 4.5s coming off the edge. They had Chase at a 3 technique, and no guard can block Chase. And I just think you got to figure out some stuff. They played Zach Harrison at 3 technique a lot. I mean, in nickel downs, they were moving him inside and put Javonte Jean-Baptiste. I mean, they're trying stuff, but it's just not, I don't know if it's more JTT, more Jack Sawyer. Like, I mean, but that's the thing that's killing us.
JTT. Yeah, I mean, I think he's looked pretty good. I mean, there's one play where he blew up a pulling guard. It was probably the best play I saw a defensive lineman make for Ohio State all day. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's, Larry Johnson, is very dedicated to 4 down, but, they've done stuff in the past, and it's sort of disconcerting, I think, from an Ohio State perspective. Like I was comparing it to watching Michigan on Saturday, and they brought in McDonald from the NFL, and like the schemes are just so light years ahead of what Ohio State's doing. And Michigan has a better pass rusher in Hutchinson than Ohio State does, but like they help him out by moving him around. They zone blitz and sim pressure like crazy. Like so, he's never, with Zach Harrison, like the offensive tackle knows what he's going to get. Like if you're moving people around or overloading pressures, then they can bring their athleticism to bear a little bit more.
Yeah, I think you got to get a little bit more exotic. I think you got to do some 3-down stuff, walk Zach around. I think that honestly, the dedicated blitzer has to be Cody Simon. I'm like you, like there's nothing that's more disconcerting than when you watch a guy who blitzes who can't get home. Like they sent Tommy on one, Tommy Eichenberg, and Tommy runs a 5 flat 40. I've seen his time, and he was 4 yards away from getting home. Where like Cody runs a 4.51, and he can get home. So it's like, that is, a half a second. Obviously, a half a second is gargantuan. So between running a 4.3 and a 4.8. So 4.3 is amazing. 4.8 is very slow. So 4.5 versus a 5 flat is a big difference. And so like, you got to have a guy that can actually get there. Because you can blitz, but if the guy's too slow to ever get home, it's not ever going to help anything. But this is going to be an interesting week, man. Obviously it's a gauge down from Oregon, but we haven't looked good against anybody in the last few games, man. We played good against Clemson, but the Bama and Oregon and Minnesota, they've all been questionable. So what how much do you think the defense will improve for the rest of the season? That'll be our final question before we wrap it up. Do you think we can get it done? And the final question, do you think Kerry Combs is our defensive coordinator next season?
So I think they can improve. Right now they're like 42nd in SP plus, like which is advanced statistical rating. That's like below where all those Oklahoma defenses were for years. They were just awful. So like they could improve and get into the 20s, and that would be a massive improvement because Ohio State's offense is second in that. So like they basically are an Oklahoma team at this point. And again, I think the things that like we've thrown out, some of them like trading off receivers, crack replace, like just mixing up coverage a little bit. None of that's like by any means exotic, but are things that can be done. And I also think the fundamentals can improve, like getting to the correct cover 3, zones. If you let guys stay on the field and play that are the better players and deserve to play. I don't know. I can just keep ranting about this, but like what kind of team, no NFL team's going to run their backups out there for a series just because like their backup linebackers, they're going to be worse because of that. Like that's why the starters are the starters. So I do think they can improve. I think if I had to bet right now, I do not think Kerry Combs will be the defensive coordinator next year because I don't think the improvements are enough, but like I could sit here, I wish I could get inside Ryan Day's head and see exactly what he's thinking. Like, cause this is ultimately like his scheme and what he wants to do. And so like, in some ways I don't blame Kerry Combs. Like, I do blame him for not being able to adjust and like see things as they're happening. And like that crack shouldn't happen a third time, but like, he was asked to come in and run a system that like Ryan Day has conceptually in his head and Kerry Combs had not previously been a part of. So that's why I'm like, if Ryan Day wants to run this like single high system, like you got to go get someone like Jeff Hafley who like coached under like it's a Pete Carroll kind of like derivative. Like you got to go find someone who coached with Pete Carroll and like knows the system inside and out because like that's how a coach knows how to adjust. So because he doesn't, I think he's sort of set up to fail. But I do think that they can improve enough with the way the Ohio State offense is that they still can win out with that.
All right, so I completely lied to you because I love to get into your mind defensively. Give me your dream hire, realistically, of a defensive coordinator for next season, and then give me like maybe one or two guys that could like. I don't want you to say like, oh, I'm gonna exhume Buddy Ryan or something like that, but like give me like a realistic like this is a guy that like don't say, oh well, my dream hire is Bill Belichick. Well, he's 80 years old and head coach of the Patriots, but like you know what I'm saying, like a realistic guy that might be a hot name that people, the guy from Boston College, or I always look at. I think that part of the issue with Ryan is because everyone wants Kerry Combs to get fired right now and they want him to be replaced. And I'm like, well, that's great, but who's going to call the defense? You have Larry Johnson, who's been a D-line coach his entire career, been best ever to do it, but never called a defense. You've got Al Washington, who's never called a defense. You've got Matt Barnes, who's never called a defense. You've got Parker Fleming, who's a special teams coordinator and never even played defense or has coached defense. So, I mean, if you fire Kerry Combs, you're going to have a bunch of guys. I mean, at least Kerry called a defense last year, but I mean, he's never – I mean, if you fire him, say clean your office out, elevate, like I don't think that helps. I think it hurts actually, because you don't – now you're going to have one less defense. You're going to have to, bring in – have one – you're going to have Paul Rhodes probably become a full-time coach, which I don't know if that helps anything or what. And honestly, I had someone ask me this. I can't remember the last time that Ohio State has fired a coach in the middle of the season. Like through Trestle's era, that never happened. Through Urban's era, even when things were as bad as they've ever been, in the middle of the season, like when you fire a guy, that means you got to clean him out, and then you got to go bring up, a GA to be a head coach for interim or whatever. So I don't know I don't think that that's a realistic solution. So I'll start off with, who do you think are some names? Who would be your dream pick? And I'll just leave it with that. I mean, this is kind of rambling about the firing thing, because I don't know. The hard part about building a staff the way Ryan's built it is he doesn't have like a former, like a guy like a Ron English, who used to be a coordinator at Michigan and the Northeastern Michigan. I was a linebackers coach for wherever, or like a Charlie Strong, who was a coordinator, then he's a head coach, now he's back to being a linebacker coach. Because there's so many of those guys that were the hot coordinator, they got a head coaching job, they got fired, and now they're a linebacker coach. Randy Shannon, these guys that were. They used to be coordinator. They have past coordinator experience, but like the way our staff's built is we have nobody else that has ever called a defense before, which is tough, because you can't say, okay, we're going to promote him and demote him and see how he does it. So that's, part of the issue with how our staff has been built. I mean, we just don't have that many guys that have called a defense. So who would be your dream pick? Couple hot names, then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because if it was up to me, I would, go get like a Saban disciple and do what they do. I'm going to assume that Ryan Day wants to stick with this overall concept of being primarily a cover 1 and cover 3 team. And in that case, frankly, a Charlie Strong would be a pretty good choice who's done a ton of that, or Will Muschamp's another one. I can't imagine, or, a DJ Durkin, who Barnes coached for, has always been come up under that Pete Carroll tree. Dan Quinn would be my ideal. Dan Quinn, he was Pete Carroll's defensive coordinator.
That'd be your dream. Yeah. Yeah.
But here's the problem, and this gets to maybe why he picked Kerry Combs. Even those guys who run cover 1 and cover 3, the Seahawks now, they still run split safety stuff a quarter of the time, a third. No one's gonna agree to pre-rotate their safeties like this. And so it depends on how stubborn Ryan Day is, because the bigger the name you bring in, the more control they're going to want to have, and so, I mean, I think at this point, if Day wants to do this, he basically has to go to Jeff Hafley. I think he'd be like, hey, Jeff, who do you suggest I hire that can run your system? Because that's sort of the only way he can make it work, absent giving up control, because it also is and you got to have 5 defensive coaches on staff. It's kind of ridiculous. They have 4 guys. They're coordinators on the field. So now you're basically reliant, and so is Larry Johnson. And so you're relying on Matt Barnes to see a lot of stuff upstairs. Yeah. And I do think he's actually improved the DB's techniques, but that's asking a lot. So you're a head coach who's also an offensive guy. So it creates a weird juxtaposition where he's an offensive guy, but he has very strong feelings. Apparently, he never goes into it too much about what the defense does and how it looks. And so I think it just depends how willing. I think it starts with Day and how willing he is to be, to either give up control, or he's going to have to go outside somewhat. But I think Kerry Combs deserves a share of blame, but I think Ryan Day does too. And you can't be this is Kerry Combs' system, because it's not. It's Ryan Day's system. Yeah.
So you threw out some pretty big names. That'll get the message board nice and stirred up. You threw out Muschamp. You threw out about every buyout coach there is, man. He's thinking about
they're all analysts in Alabama right now, so it works well.
No, I know. That's the best part is they'll know the Saban system, because they're all they're all sitting there making $100,000 and collecting $5 million from the school that fired them. So that's living the good life. Well, dude,
West Champ's like
this
bringing
is
out towels at Alabama practice right now, so it's all good.
oh, dude, I know. Yeah, he's keeping the Gatorade cold. You know,
Exactly.
yeah. Dude, this has been maybe my favorite podcast I've ever done, dude. So I really appreciate you taking the time, bro. This has been incredible. I can't wait to get this one up for the Scoop fam. Gonna load up the boards, man. It's time to get on the boards and get grinding, man, because people are excited. They want to know the answers. And but dude, I really appreciate you, Ross. Thank you, Nooner, for running this thing. Nevada was here for a minute, but this has been an awesome episode. This has been the Scoop World Order.